A few summers ago, you might know this, that when Sarah still lived up north of us in the Fort Collins area, it's actually at Bellevue, and she and her family, her dad is the preacher at Pleasant Valley Church of Christ, and they live right next to the church building. And a few summers ago, they had to evacuate their house because of a fire. And you probably remember the High Park fire. It's considered one of the biggest fires that ever has hit Colorado in memory. And they got a knock on the door at about 3 a.m. It's the scenario that a lot of us have imagined what it might be like to suddenly have to make some quick decisions. There was a knock on the door, and they answered it, and they were told by the authorities that you are to leave your house. The fire was about a half mile away, and it got pretty close. The church building is well over 100 years old, and they'd lived in that house for quite a while. So it was that scenario that you can imagine where you begin to think, okay, it's time to make a decision here. It's the one that we always imagine. What would you take from the house? Because you only have so much time. You're forced in that scenario to reduce everything to two categories: things you can leave behind and things that you can take. In fact, Sarah and her family had to evacuate a second time later, not because of a fire, but because of water. They had a flood. So that area has had a fire and a flood, but so they're probably totally safe now. You can probably the safest place in Colorado at this point. The odds of anything else happening to them. But more than once, they have had to scramble and look their lives over and say, okay, what do we need to take out of here? I actually heard about another fire, and I'm sure you've got stories that you could share too. There was a family that their house was on fire, and it was well in progress when the father woke up, and in his mind he thought, okay, the house is on fire, I'm going to turn. He turned. His plan was to grab his pants, put on his pants, gather his family, and get out of there. When he reached to pick up his pants were on fire. So quickly the plan changed. They just went as is in their jammies and went out into the front yard. They had just enough time to get themselves out of the fire and to safety. It makes you realize that there's different kinds of scenarios. There's the time where you say, okay, it's time to evacuate, you may have an hour, but when you have split seconds, there's not much time to think about it. And everything's reduced to what really is important to you. And of course, the point is that all of this is kind of a good way when we apply this to our own minds to find out what's really valuable to someone. If your house was on fire, what would you save? Of course, other than the people that are important to you. Well, even the ones that aren't important. I guess you'd save those too. But, how much time you would have can determine what you would grab. Of course, first the loved ones, and then certain objects that are valuable to you. Of course, the pets, they go with you too. But as far as photos and mementos, things that are kind of hard or impossible to replace, when we realize there's a real threat to what, the surrounding of our life, we learn what really matters to us. And if I were to ask you tonight to make a list of what matters to you, of the things that are valuable to you, you probably, if I just left it at that, make a list of all the things that matter to you, it'd probably be a pretty long list. But as you kept working on the list, you'd start probably reducing it to a few things that really matter to you. Of course, maybe like your marriage or your family and your friendships. This congregation, I know, would be on your list. Things of great value that we don't ever want to lose. We want to keep them. Once in a while, you hear a sad story or two. And this is no sudden revelation to you. You hear bad news about a marriage. You hear about a couple and you think, not them. I thought everything was fine. At least from where we were standing, everything seemed fine for years. And then you hear about how it all fell apart. Or a congregation. That's an old story too, where it just seemed like they were one of the strong ones, and then you hear either word of mouth or you find out for yourself that it all kind of just went south and fell apart. Things that were once good, and somehow they ended up going bad. Great situations that were once wonderful, but something happened. Something along the way. When I hear about these situations, whether it's an individual or a congregation or a couple, relationships, I kind of wish I could go back in time. I see people sometimes where things are not going well, and I wish I could kind of rewind their life and look at everything closely and maybe pinpoint where it all went wrong. Maybe there was one particular decision. Maybe it was one day where it was just kind of that fork in the road where it all kind of made all the difference in the world. Maybe if we examined a congregation or a marriage, you could possibly see where things went bad, where they took a wrong turn or some bad decision along the way. It's hard to say. We're talking in class on Sunday mornings, in particular this morning, about Satan and about our enemy. His very name means adversary. He's the enemy. When you see something fall apart or you hear about it, like a marriage or a congregation, you can be sure that if you were somehow to trace things upstream, you would be able to trace the source of the ruin somehow to our adversary, to Satan. He provides the means to bring it all down. And we emphasized in class that, unfortunately, Satan is often presented as almost as a laughable character, but he is out to ruin things, and he's very, very good at it. He is not out to recruit you. He is out to destroy you. And the reason I bring this up is, as I say, you have certain things that are valuable to you. And you need to know that these are the things that he will ruin if you will allow it. Those are his targets. They're some of the most wonderful blessings in your life right now. These are what he will target. These are your treasures, and that's what he'll go after. And you need to know, if you're not careful, the enemy will ruin them. He has proven that time and time again. I need to say this just in passing. Even if he does, if you quickly turn things over to God, blessings can still arrive even in the aftermath, even in the rubble. But he knows what makes you tick, and he knows what makes things unravel and how to do it. 2 Corinthians 2:11, we mentioned in class this morning. 2 Corinthians 2:11 essentially is talking about how we're not to let him take advantage of us. And then it goes on to say this. I think it says a lot. It says, we are not ignorant of his schemes, or we shouldn't be, but he's saying you don't have to be in the dark about how he works. We are not ignorant of his schemes. We know his schemes, and sometimes it helps if you stop and think about it from his perspective. Here you are with specific things that are very valuable to you. These will be his targets. He won't go after the insignificant stuff. You know, he'll pick up the crumbs as needed, but it's ultimately to ruin the big stuff. He won't necessarily go after what means little to you. Our enemy will target whatever matters to you the most if you let him. That's where he'll do his damage. He's making efforts to ruin what you love, and that means we need to protect them. If you leave them unattended, so to speak, it will just be a matter of time. And we are protective on a superficial level. When you came in, more than likely you locked your car. If you want to get up, if you're forgotten, go handle that right now. You can do that. But we don't even think about it anymore. We make sure the car is locked. When you go home, you probably put your seatbelts on. You're interested in protecting your loved ones from inertia and things like that, forces that can harm you. Tonight you'll lock your doors. You may even have a security alarm. But on a deeper level, there are greater dangers, greater threats. We live in a world that is antagonistic just on a physical level. The laws of nature are dismantling our treasures, slowly breaking everything down. As one poet put it very simply and straightforward to the point, everything falls apart. It was meant to be like that. Jesus said it first in Matthew 6, if you want to turn there. Matthew 6, starting with verse 19. There's a lot. This is one of those passages where I kind of see it and somebody might read it and say, oh yeah, I know this verse. But you may be not seeing everything there is to notice. As always with the Bible, Matthew 6:19, he says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And it's kind of startling to realize that most of what you care about is designed to fall apart. You notice moth and rust. Those things are constantly unmaking it all in some form. Insects and chemical reactions. It's built into the system to undo the things that matter to us. And if that doesn't do the trick, mankind will. We've got thieves who break in and steal. Moths and rust and thieves all ready to ruin what you love in the way that they have in their own special way. And that's just the physical possessions. I think in a sense, there's the same kind of thing is happening on a deeper level. I guess you could say more of a spiritual level as far as moths and rust and thieves that ruin marriages and families and congregations. Moths are the things that chew away a little at a time. And rust is the gradual degradation that weakens unity. And thieves are the things that simply take the good things from you. And you notice that moths are small. And rust is gradual. And thieves are quiet. That's how Satan works, with something that seems small and harmless, something that's gradual, something that is subtle and quiet. Things like unkindness and malice and selfishness and gossip. I think that's what you would find at that fork in the road a lot of times. These are the things that ruin our treasures. Like thieves, they slip in right under our noses, take away what we love the most, and then we wake up one day and find out that what we once cherished has been taken or corrupted. I get a little more bad news. It gets worse. Satan is not just good at ruining what we love. He's also good at taking what we love and then using it against us. Using it to hurt us. Can you imagine what a terrible story that is, to be ruined by the very things that we love? He takes our greatest treasures and uses them to ruin us. And one of the most effective ways he does this is by using things that seem good. 2 Corinthians 11:14, again, we mentioned this in class. 2 Corinthians 11:14 talks about how Satan masquerades or disguises himself as an angel of light. I think it's a safe paraphrase to say he uses what appears to be good. When you examine the treasures of your life, if you're not careful, these are the weapons for your spiritual downfall. And that includes your religion. Satan is very good at using religion to destroy souls. He's proven that time and time again. Now, considering all this, it might be easy to just think, well, so in conclusion, everybody go home and be worried. And that's not going to do us any good. There is an answer that I can offer you to make sure that Satan doesn't ruin what you love, to make sure he doesn't use what you love against you. And you might be surprised what the solution is, and here it is. Get rid of it. When I don't know about you, but whenever I move, I think I've lived about a dozen places in Denver since I moved here from Colorado Springs. A couple of years here and maybe 3 years there. And every time I move stuff, I notice all the stuff I've accumulated. Those of you who have moved recently have experienced this. And I feel better when I watch the show Hoarders, but I'm not too far off from that. I don't feel as bad about the junk I have, but I've accumulated stuff. That's one thing Sarah and I have learned about each other. I've had more time to accumulate stuff. And there have been times when I look at the stuff that I have to load into the back of a pickup truck and I think, you know what? I almost wish somebody had stolen this. I wish there had been a fire at the storage unit. You know, I wouldn't have had any choice in the matter. Just be all gone and I wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. I want to suggest literally getting rid of everything is not always the answer. But letting go of it is very key to what we're talking about. You'll notice that when you feel a threat toward the things that you love, maybe it's money or, physical possessions along those lines, maybe even relationships, and we're faced with the real possibility of losing it, our natural reaction is to cling tighter to it, kind of grit our teeth and hang on. And that might delay things, but the moths and the rust and the thieves are inevitable, and our enemy is stronger than us, and he will ruin them or take them or use them against you. I really believe the only real solution to protecting your treasures is to get rid of them, and I'll explain what I mean by that. I guess maybe a better way to put it is to relocate them. Matthew 6:20, back there, you'll notice he says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal." So notice the first important point we have to notice here is that we have the wrong treasures a lot of times. If it's just physical stuff, you better not get too attached. It's the spiritual treasures that matter. But we have a tendency to cling to our stuff and cling to pitiful things. We're blind and very blind to priceless things that are spiritual. I think sometimes we're like a child trying to maintain a friendship with a snowman. It's nice for a while, but it's very temporary, and it has a sad ending. Paul had clarity. If you look at Philippians 3:8, inspired by God, Paul compared the spiritual treasures with all this temporary physical stuff, just to give it some clarity. He makes a comparison. Philippians 3:8. More than that, I count all things to be loss in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ, Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them but rubbish, so that I may gain Christ. So he's essentially saying if you place all the temporary world stuff next to the actual spiritual treasures, it's trash. You're clinging to trash. And it's important that we don't get attached to trash. Matthew 6:21, going back there, he says, "But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." If you want to find your heart, figure out where your treasures are. And you see this in one particular case with someone that we can all identify with, and I know we've read his story many times, but we need to look at him one more time, at least one more time. Matthew 19, verse 16. Matthew 19, verse 16. This is a guy who had a really good grip. And someone came to him and said, "Teacher, what good thing shall I do that I may obtain eternal life?" And he said to him, "Why are you asking me about what is good? There's only one who is good, but if you wish to enter into life, keep the commandments." Then he said to him, "Which ones?" And Jesus said, "You shall not commit murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. Honor your father and mother. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself." The young man said to him, "All these things I have kept. What am I still lacking?" Jesus said to him, "If you wish to be complete, go and sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come, follow me." But when the young man heard this statement, he went away grieving, for he was one who owned much property. It's easy for us to stand outside this man's life and see how tightly he clings to his stuff. Jesus told him he had to let go. He was hanging on to the wrong treasure. Matthew 6 that we've been reading here is about choosing the right treasures. But don't miss one important detail. God is not telling us to just let go of what we treasure. He's telling us that the safest place to keep it all is not here. It's heaven. You think about all the treasures that have maybe crossed your mind in the last few minutes, the things that you love the most. The only safe place for them is in the hands of God. That's why you need to get rid of them, because if you hang on to them, it's not going to last. In other words, you let go of them and turn them over to God. We're like children who've been given a valuable heirloom. We need to give it to our Father for safekeeping. We're like a small child who finds something. If they are wise and they really value it, their concern will outweigh their curiosity, and they'll give it to their father for safekeeping. If you look at 2 Timothy 1:12, this very concept is presented by God through Paul. 2 Timothy 1:12. Notice this idea that God's going to keep the good stuff for you. "For this reason, I also suffer these things, but I'm not ashamed, for I know whom I've believed, and I'm convinced that he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him until that day." Notice he says he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him. We have a tendency to cling to what matters to us, and we hang on until it's ruined. Our enemy is capable of ruining what we love and ultimately using it to bring about our own spiritual ruin. But our Father is not only eager to protect our treasures, he's eager to improve them. And he'll use our treasures to help us. But they have to be in his hands. So it comes down to this. Consider the things that you love the most, the people that you love the most. If God is not involved in some fashion, then God is not the one using it. There is no in between. The best protection you can provide anything is to place it in God's hands, any aspect of your life. If it is not, it is easy pickings for the enemy. If it seems clearly disassociated from God, it's probably not in his hands. Make sure that God is involved. Anything separate from him is in great danger. Another part of the answer is to make sure that God is more important than anything else in our lives, because anything placed above God is not in his hands and is also in great danger. God must come first. All the things you love will be better for it. I remember my dad telling me, you will never, ever be the husband or wife you could have been unless you put God first, unless you turn your marriage over to God. You will never be the brother or sister in Christ that you could have been unless you make God first and completely turn religion and everything with it over to your Father. We have a lot of plans. I know every one of us have some kind of plan, either to become more spiritual, to be a better brother or sister, a better son or daughter, a better mother or father, a better husband or wife. But a lot of that will never happen if we're too busy clinging to the wrong things and clinging to the things that are temporary. We need to cling to the right things and rely on God's strength and not our strength to protect them. So be on your guard. We're not unaware of our enemy's schemes. He will not just ruin what you love, he will use it against you. And the best way to prevent this is to make sure God is using it instead. That's the best way to think about it. The best way to make sure your enemy is not using it is make sure that it's already in use and not available. If these things are in God's hands, the things that matter most will be kept safe, and there will be nothing to worry about. Everything is at risk. All the things you've been planning on doing in order to do the right thing are very, very important. Don't wait too long. It's kind of like we're in a large house, and I can guarantee you it's going to be on fire, and there will be zero time when that fire begins. So if you value anything, if there are some things that are dear to your heart, if there are people that are dear to your heart, turn them over to God. Anything of real value will be safe with him. I'll tell you one more thing and then we'll close. I'm happy to tell you that when the High Park fire happened, in fact, on the way here, Sarah and I were talking about this. There was a lot of damage, of course. A lot of houses are gone. They're ashes now. And it left a lot of people in need. The congregation where Sarah's family is, her dad is a preacher there, and a lot of people helped to organize an effort where they could help with the relief. And there was a lot of people that were helped through the congregation there. And the way they helped people, the manner in which they did it, not only providing physical sustenance and shelter and things like that, but the way they did it with the love and clearly with the example of Jesus, it caught the attention of one man in particular. His name was Dennis. As a direct result of the fire, and as a direct result of the way these Christians helped people because of this disaster, Dennis eventually looked beyond all the things that once mattered to him most. He was surrounded by people who had greater treasures, and he noticed it. And he saw that these people relied on God, who's able to guard what is entrusted to him, and Dennis became a Christian. He died last year, but because he placed his life in the hands of God, I'm very happy to tell you that Dennis is safe and sound. It's always important to stop and think and consider the things that matter to you compared to what should matter to you, and we all need to make some adjustments. If you have need, we ask that you please make it be known, but at the very least, I'm going to encourage you that before the day is over, make sure that everything you value is in God's hands, and that includes your soul. Pray you'll think about this while we stand together and sing.